Mr. Garett Reppenhagen, Rocky Mountain Director, Vet Voice Foundation. Garett is the son of a Vietnam vet, grandson of 2 World War II veterans. He served in the U.S. Army as a cavalry scout sniper in the 1st Infantry Division. Garett completed deployment to Kosovo on a 9-month peacekeeping mission and a combat tour in Iraq. Garett gained his honorable discharge in May of 2005, began working as a veteran advocate and a dedicated activist. He served as chairman of the board of the Iraq Veterans Against the War, worked in D.C. as a lobbyist, and as vice president of public relations for the Nobel Prize-winning Veterans for America, and as a program director for Veterans Green Jobs as well. Garett currently lives in Denver, Colorado, and is the Rocky Mountain West coordinators for Vet Voice Foundation. Very glad to have you here. Thank you for your service then and now. And the floor is yours.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. As you can tell, I'm no stranger to extremism or violence. In the military, we have a term using the NATO phonetic alphabet. It's called Charlie Mike. It means continue mission. Typically used after minor setbacks in operations, it's a motivational way for our ground forces to overcome obstacles and determined to march on in the face of any challenge. But it also applies to much of what's happening today around our parks and public lands. Much of last spring was spent celebrating our public lands. From the designation of 3 new national monuments to National Park Week, it was a time for the country to come together and show appreciation for the lands, water, and open spaces that are part of our shared national heritage and embody so much of what we believe to be unique and special about America. That is why recent violent actions and rhetoric from a small group of extremists aiming to take over our nation's public lands, including at the Malheur National Wildlife Refuge, are so disturbing. Not only do these lands belong to all Americans, but I sharply disagree with anyone who seeks to disenfranchise the American people through force of violence and through personal gain. These efforts to upend peaceful democratic process upon which our nation is built run contrary to what I, as a veteran, have fought for. As a military veteran, the violation of these spaces in particular is particularly painful. The outdoors hold a uniquely powerful and special place in the hearts of veterans who value the open space for recreation and recuperation. Our public lands are part of what generations of brave Americans have fought for. Not only should these lands remain public, they should remain places veterans and their families can go to spend time without fear of armed militiamen who seek to claim the land as their own. So the violence we have seen in recent months is not only disrespectful, but personally offensive to so many in the veterans community. Many law enforcement officers from the Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service, National Park Service, Forest Service, and elsewhere have been on the receiving end of violent actions and rhetoric are also military veterans. These men and women should be applauded for their service and their work to safeguard visitors and the natural resources across our public lands, not harassed or intimidated. In a recent speech, Secretary of Interior Sally Jewell stood up for our public lands and called for us, as Americans, to stand alongside her to ensure that continued health and protection of these special places. From funding for national parks and public lands to the importance of continuing to protect places with special natural, cultural, and historic value, Secretary Jewell made one thing clear: it won't always be easy, and it's up to us to make it happen. I thank the President and Secretary Jewell for their stewardship and urge the administration and decision makers to continue the mission to ensure our spaces with cultural, historic, and natural significance remain protected and accessible for all of us to enjoy it. Charlie Mike, thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me quick questions, and then we'll let everybody get out of here. Garett, veterans and to veteran organizations, and I had the pleasure of working, getting to know individuals involved in an outdoors activity for returning veterans that was part of their reintegration into the community, to their families, and also in some instances therapeutic. And so vets, their place in the public lands, and how you see that relationship. And you also mentioned that many of the returning vets, because of some of the preferences that were set up by Congress, are at the front line in terms of the public lands, in terms of law enforcement, park rangers, et cetera. And I remember that one picture, I don't know what, one of the newspapers where one of the, during the Bundy siege, he's over a overpass with a rifle and a scope, and you have the U.S. Marshals and park rangers down below. The site was down. I think that was, I hope people saw how chilling that was, but veterans, I think, and their support for the public lands, I think, is kind of unique and pretty powerful.
Well, I can say that I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for our public lands. My transition home was only survivable because I was able to access public lands. My mother's house is basically back door leads to Pike National Forest in Colorado. And when I got back home from Iraq, I immediately took a tent, fishing pole, and water purifier and headed out into the woods. And I don't think I would have lived if it wasn't for that opportunity. And I've talked to veterans in programs like Outward Bound, Healing Waters, Patriot Anglers. You know, the list just goes on and on. There's so many great veterans organizations that get veterans outdoors to find that healing property. And if you want to see true transformation and healing, take a 3-tour Marine Corps veteran that's hard as nails and see after a couple minutes being outdoors him revert back to an 8-year-old jumping on logs and kicking water in streams. And it's amazing, and it's useful not only for our mental health but our physical health. We're challenged by trying to climb mountaintops to reach that next goal. We bond with our friends and family after long deployments where we don't have the distractions of shopping malls and colored TVs, and we have those real conversations with the people that we love in a natural setting, and it's so critical. I've seen better VA therapy sessions happen around a campfire than in the fluorescent lights of a VA hospital. So those are important. And then our public lands, I mean, we swore an oath to defend the Constitution in these lands that we walk along. And, you know, there's no better representation of this democracy than the land that we share. And I can tell you that, you know, the identity of most Americans are related directly to our outdoors. Our, you know, folks identify with the Grand Canyon and with El Capitan, and, you know, our parks and forests are part of that American identity, and that's what we fought for overseas. And when you see, you know, groups of militias that choose not to use the political process and the system that we fought to defend, but try to subvert that and use weapons and threats and intimidation to do that, it's really scary. I've seen the result of factionist, sectarian violence and bigotry overseas, and the product is horrible. And if we continue down this route, we're going to head into the same situation that I saw overseas where I was fighting in Iraq and in other places. So it's really scary for me as a veteran, and it's sad to see that there's other veterans that choose not to represent the majority of our Americans and our democracy and take part in these actions. So I guess that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Let me.
I just want to thank the panel and yourself, especially Mr. Blount, for your courage for being here. I hope you continue to have the courage to speak out as this issue grows and we get larger and more attended panels, that you continue to have that courage. I appreciate it.
With that, let me thank you once again, and the members that attended. I'll go to. Let me just extend to the whole panel a minute or so. Any closing comments, any thoughts, and we'll adjourn after that. But let me once again thank you, and I think the commitment of the members that were here and colleagues that were not here is that our natural resources, our public lands, are a shared commodity. To put it in that sense, everybody owns it, regardless of who you are. You own a part of it. And it's also a shared responsibility. And resource questions in terms of the agencies being able to do their job. And the other issue is that there has to be some focus on the part of law enforcement agencies at a national level to understand that the responsibility they have to enforce the law, A, and B, to make sure there's consequences for breaking that law. And, you know, those lapse of time created a situation where there is a delayed consequence was no consequence. And it allowed other things to grow around it, especially the Bundys. And with that, thank you so much. And let me begin with you, Mr. Cohen, and go down the line for any closing comment. Or
Thank you. Very, very briefly. You know, I think the one important thing to always point out is the hypocrisy of some of the people on the other side. People, you know, pledge allegiance to our country, yet stand with those who would spit on the Constitution. It is quite wrong, and I think they always need to be called out, especially people in high places. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today, and anything that we can ever do to help the Natural Resources Committee, the Homeland Security Committee, please don't hesitate to call on us.
thank you, sir. Ms. MacNab.
I think it's fabulous that you're bringing attention to this. I've been running around and waving with my hands in the air for 18 years saying, pay attention. So I think this is really wonderful. I think in order to move forward, it has to be done in a neutral setting. It has to be everyone at a big table. It can't be, okay, your side did this, well, your side did that, because I think that is what keeps the two sides from coming to the table. And so I would ask for some form of politically neutral conversation. When a left-wing extremist goes out and commits a crime, left-wing people don't say, oh, you know, that's one of us, and therefore, you know, you're blaming us for committing crimes. Right-wing has to disassociate itself from right-wing crime. It's very, very important. And to do that, it has to be a neutral setting.
Point well taken. Thank you. Mr. Blount.
I'd just like to make mention of the National Wildlife Refuge system has 255 full-time law enforcement officers. A study done in 2015 that was sanctioned by the Fish and Wildlife Service says we need 1,149. So protection of those types of public lands is needed. The other thing I'd like to point out is in Harney County, where Malheur National Wildlife Refuge is where it is, the partnership between federal and, in our case, ranchers works, and it is working. And you saw the passion from Georgia Marshall, and I think that's a great model to be used across the United States. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jenkins.
Yeah, just 2 points. There's been a lot of talk about why we don't focus on these domestic terrorists and call them terrorists. And in the case of this public land extremism, you know, we have a situation where these people wear cowboy hats, they wave the American flag, they call themselves patriots. And the thing is, we cannot let them define themselves. We have got to define them as the extremists and radicals that they are, and the fact that they're not patriotic. They're actually working against our nation and our values. And so I think we have to make sure that we pull that veil of legitimacy that they put on themselves, we take that away from them. Secondly, the other thing that ties into this is the whole effort to transfer public lands to states. And, you know, they're using this extremism to their benefit, but never forget that the driving force behind that is special interest. And a few states that think that they can turn a quick buck by selling off our nation's natural assets. This is exactly opposite of the values espoused by Theodore Roosevelt, who said, I do not intend that our natural resources should be exploited by the few against the interest of the many. So, you know, he's a Republican, he's a great president, he's on Mount Rushmore. I think we need to try to get more people on both sides of the aisle to embrace his view of what our public land should be.
Excellent points. Thank you. Sir?
I just want to thank the panel and yourself, especially Mr. Blount, for your courage for being here. I hope you continue to have the courage to speak out as this issue grows and we get larger and more attended panels, that you continue to have that courage. I appreciate it.
With that, let me thank you once again, and the members that attended. Although it appears to be lonely up here right now, they did attend, and this is really good. Appreciate it. Thank you. Adjourn.